final quarterly update for the enterprise course catalog prototype development. And we've been working now for the last 11 months. Crazy to think that the time has flown by. We've had several quarterly updates, I think 4 or 5 prior to this. And this is really the summary level presentation of what we've been able to achieve over the last 11 or so months, and really helps to kind of talk to the broader capability of the enterprise course catalog that we've built to date, and then the direction that we're taking as ADL moves forward in further building out on the work that we've done here in this current base period of performance. With that in mind, before I do introductions, I'll just remind everyone what I said just a few moments ago related to questions during the session. Please feel free at any point in time to log a question using the message bar here within Teams. We won't be able to address them immediately once you ask, but what we'll do is we'll collect the questions across the session. And then when we have time at the end, about 15-20 minutes, we will be able to review some of the questions that have been posed. Another small request for those who are not speaking, if you can go on mute. Okay, great. So first, a few introductions. We've got 2 presenters today. I'm one of them. My name is Eric Flamer. I'm with Deloitte. I'm a senior manager in our government and public sector practice. I'm also the project manager for this enterprise course catalog effort. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Matt Dreyer.
Sure, thanks, Eric. Hi, I'm Matt Dreyer. I'm the Director of Enterprise Solutions for edX up here in Massachusetts. I'm located just north of Boston, and we've been working very closely with Deloitte and ADL over the course of the project, both from a product perspective, but also from an application and technology architecture perspective. So it's been an excellent project for everyone involved, and looking forward to telling you all about our accomplishments today.
I think now's a great time to also highlight that edX is a founding contributor to the enterprise course catalog. So they're our first external content repository, and many of you should be familiar with edX. Obviously the massive open online courseware that's available across a range of topics, stemming from lots of really significant universities and colleges across the world. So it's been an absolute privilege to work with edX and then with ADL as well, as we think about really the problem that we're trying to solve for here within enterprise learning and development and within DoD, but also across government and really kind of globally across the world for all organizations. The enterprise course catalog that we're going to showcase today is the system to consolidate information that's pulled from all the diverse local course catalogs, all the systems that contain learning objects, knowledge objects. What the ECC does is it pulls all of that into a single enterprise catalog capability. It's not just the storefront, it's also the data services and the data that we'll speak to today. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to promote search, obviously for experiences, but also discovery of meaningful experiences. And then finally, alignment. So being able to match those experiences that currently exist to other dimensions of data that are meaningful in the learning and development lifecycle, but also the human capital lifecycle. Right, and that allows us, especially enhancing the work that ADL is doing, thinking about how we affect change, not just in the data pillar related to courses, but also the data pillars related to events, learner events, competencies and credentials and skill frameworks, and then, of course, learner records as well. All this comes together to really present a single view of the experiences that are available in across the organizations that are contributing to the ECC. We purposefully use the word experiences because what this is going to allow us to do is to start to let go of just the traditional construct of an in-person class or an e-learning or a structured course that is usually what the LMS bounds us to, and really be able to catalog and present for access, greatest access, to other learning experiences as well that include in-person courses and virtual courses and e-learning. So this is dramatically expanding the catalog of experiences that a learner across DoD, across organizations, is going to be able to search and find. So not everybody has been part of this process here over the last year. So, one of the sort of overview ground setting here is to just take you through how far we've come, I think, in the last 11 and a half months. We started with ADL's TLA requirements. So ADL has a host of requirements that are related to this Enterprise Experience Index. Between the conversations of Matt, ADL, myself, we're able to really focus on building in a 12-year period this operational prototype that would establish a new and open source project similar to what you see in a learning experience platform, which is one of the hottest learning technology products in the marketplace today. Our major efforts were to rethink that model around an unlicensed version of an LXP. And what we've been able to do is develop independently deployable service-oriented components that really support the whole life cycle of that LXP learning experience discovery action. And what we hope to showcase today too is that we've also built out a lot of avenues for adoption and integration, which is reflected in the fact that we're advancing very quickly towards an initial operating capability. I'm very excited to push the great work that we've done in the operational prototype to the next steps in this really development of the solution. We'll get to that before the end of the session today. We've been able to accomplish a good amount of feature sets, really a strong vertical slice or MVP in this operational prototype development period. Our focus, obviously, at the tip of the iceberg is enterprise search. So what we're going to see in a few minutes with the demo is our search portal, our ability to access records that are in the ECC and gather meaningful information that's enhanced metadata related to those underlying learning experiences that come from 4 catalogs. We worked with 3 DoD organizations, DAU, AETC, and Joint Knowledge Online. And then we also included edX. So edX contributed an external content repository to that enterprise search capability. What we've built at a more user-focused level is the ability to spotlight courses. So provide specific courses and make them relevant to a learner throughout the user experience. And then a big thing to report in this final sprint increment was interest groups. So we'll be able to showcase how we've been able to start bundling courses so that learners will be able to access groupings of courses and then even create their own groupings for others to be able to discover and consume. That's all the front end, sort of user experience as it relates to the learner. But what we've also built is a method for managing the newly indexed records and a data pipeline to be able to automate all of this metadata enhancement. At every step of the way, we want to make sure that this is as configurable as it can be for all of our different organizations that want to adopt. We have a pretty robust application administration, and we have a lot of software hooks, right? So there are going to be many different ways to pick up the work that's been done here in this past year and make use of the outcomes of the data and the enhanced data that I've been describing here over the last few minutes. What we're probably most excited about, I think, is really gathering a lot of momentum, is some DevSecOps practices that are bringing us closer to what we call a one-click deployment. And so we're really hoping to point this operational prototype in the direction for the IOC to be able to dramatically accelerate deploying the whole ECC solution or parts of the ECC solution, which are going to help to meet the needs of all the different stakeholder organizations we know are interested in adopting this technology. So where does that leave us in terms of our original problem statement and what we expected to get out of this? Well, we start with the learner. You know, the individual is the ultimate beneficiary. The learner is going to be able to have a method for accelerating discovery. We really see this as a capability similar to Google or YouTube, something that dramatically facilitates and makes easier the process of finding content that's relevant and meaningful. And we know in the case of DoD, that's oftentimes so difficult because of the need to cross organizational boundaries. Well, this enterprise course catalog is going to reflect data and available information from multiple sources. And that's something that we can also expand upon. That won't just be content that's owned by an organization, much like in the case of edX. It might also be a content repository for licensed content that an organization already has access to. What we do see too is really the transformation at scale for the learning and development organizations. So this is about providing really a robust tool and set of methods to digitize the learning experiences that you currently have. We're not replacing any of them. What we're giving our core adopting organizations is the ability to broadcast what they're doing, publish what they're doing, but also control the publishing of that information so that you can make your content available at scale and really dramatically impact the learning and development function across organizations and bring so much of the good content that we have, across the DAUs of the world, the AETCs, and the JKOs to wider audiences to have the impact that we often envision as we think about building content and deploying content. The bottom line is that our solution provides flexible, extensible, and secure deployment options. And again, in terms of organizational adoption from an IT perspective, we are really excited to be working with DoD stakeholders to make this a smooth and fast deployment so that we can accelerate adoption of these technologies. So I'm going to turn it over to Nat now to take us through the functional and the technical background for the solution. And Matt, if you want to, let me give you control so that you can drive. You could also request control from me.
All right, so yeah, how does it work? So we're going to get into the sort of the product functionality a little bit more here. Talk about the solution itself, and we always like to start when we talk about technology. It's really easy to jump into what it does, the bells and whistles of it, and then what happens is you kind of get lost in who this is really for and how it's helping real people. So from a product perspective, we always want to start with who's using this software and who's getting the benefit from this technology. And we really have three primary personas. If you remember from earlier parts of the project, we actually have more personas than this defined. They're more granular, but generally from an archetype perspective, we have three personas that we're catering to. The first persona is the learner persona. This is the person who is benefiting from this new knowledge and or these skills that they're gaining by working through a particular experience. And we've been working with the ADL team on the definition of a learning experience over the course of the project as well, with respect to the learning experience metadata standards. And it's really helped to sort of craft the ideas and some of the workflows that have been part of this solution. But as Eric mentioned earlier, we're really focused on this solution being a way for people to quickly and efficiently identify a learning experience that's meaningful to them in some way. Perhaps it's helping them to advance in their career. Perhaps it's helping them to gain some new skills or knowledge in the context of their current role, or for any other potential purpose. So that's really the primary use case that we've focused on for the learner. Get in, find what you need very quickly and efficiently, and then get out of this particular tool and get to where you need to be in order to start that experience. The second persona we're focused on is the L&D manager. So as Eric mentioned earlier, we've built in capabilities for the managers of these experiences to be able to control the data that gets indexed from the source repositories, as well as augment that information and provide supplemental information about those metadata or about those experiences in the form of additional metadata. And all of that gets indexed by this technology and pulled into the search engine, which again rolls back around to the learner and being able to find things quickly and efficiently. And then our third persona is one that I brought very early on into the conversation, because this is a persona that oftentimes gets overlooked in technology build-outs. This is the operator persona. And I think what's really interesting here is because we had a intentional focus on the operator persona, some of the things that you'll see that we'll talk about that are fairly cutting edge with respect to technology and really helping DoD to advance on the deployment front are because we focused on this operator use case and making sure that there was flexibility, extensibility, security built into this, even at the prototype stage. So we've learned a lot. We've produced some working examples and even some usable examples of operator level functionality, and I think that's really one of the big wins from this project overall. And back to sort of I'll go. I was just going to talk really quickly about the stuff at the bottom there, Eric, where we just talked about data and tech. And I know I covered it sort of in words quickly, but what we're really talking about with respect to operators is the pipeline for ingesting indexing and ingesting metadata, and having that be something that's very easily deployable, controlled, manageable, secured, and then also the technology itself that represents the installations of the various components of the solution, and having good, robust control over all of those different pieces. So, all right, now next slide. All right, so let's talk about sort of the general workflow for this. So, just a couple of key milestones along the workflow to call out. So how does this work? Basically, a Department of Defense organization would deploy what we call an indexing agent. Now, these have been called different things over the course of the project. They started off with the term scraper. We decided that indexing agent made more sense. Just from a terminology standpoint, it's really designed to run on its own as a separate deployed component. It has a scheduler built in. It can wake up on its own and perform its work on its own. So it really is effectively an agent that can do whatever work is necessary to be able to retrieve as much metadata as possible about a particular learning experience. Now, in the prototype, we're reaching out to a singular source repository to collect metadata from, say, the DAU API for its web service or something along those lines. But an agent could, in theory, do a lot of different work to collect a robust set of metadata about learning experiences. So it might start with a primary catalog service for a particular source, and then it might reach out to additional ancillary metadata sources. It might go into an LMS and pull package information, activity information, content information, and build a more robust picture about a particular learning experience, and then pass all of that upstream to be indexed and then made discoverable. So these agents are actually very capable pieces of technology in and of themselves. So if we advance, then essentially what happens is these newly indexed records are centralized, and all of the updates are coming in automatically through the agent, but then a manager can go in and actually augment that information. They can modify it, they can override certain fields if they need to, and they can provide supplemental information that gets indexed and passed along with the automatic base metadata. So there's a lot of control here, and a lot of the ability to again just add additional robust information. Moving on to the next stage. Now, once this information has been indexed by the system, it's been additionally indexed within our search engine technology that is part of the overall pipeline. And now there's a discovery interface that the learners are able to access. And here that is where they can search through different learning experiences. They can provide keywords, which you'll see in our demo, to be able to match on certain pieces of information. If there's information, as I said earlier, that isn't available in the base record, but that a manager provides, say, special codes or keywords or things like that that need to be additionally indexed for search, those can be provided. So if we know that learners search on a particular control code or something that's not available in the base metadata, we can make that possible to match on. There's browsing and filtering capabilities. There's actually a really nice dynamic filtering capability that you'll see. And it's really just possible to discover any form of indexed experience. It doesn't really matter what the form factor is, as long as it's a metadata record, we can make that discoverable. The other interesting thing is we're really focused on, in addition to the intentional search for a learning experience, we've also brought in the idea of experiences find you. So as Eric mentioned earlier, there's this concept of an interest group, and there'll be coming down the road, there'll be ways to be notified as a learner. If I'm subscribed to this interest group, I can receive a notification that tells me that there are new matches for, say, a keyword search or something along those lines. So I can have that information come my way. And then essentially what we end up with is this nice cycle where we have this indexing pipeline that's retrieving all of these metadata records. Things are being augmented. They're being made searchable and discoverable via the discovery portal. And we have this sort of curated and engagement cycle that goes on. And it's all being driven by the underlying data. It's really just trying to stick with the original principles and problems that we were faced with from a business case perspective, which is finding things is difficult, discovering exactly what I should be finding is tough as well. Is there a way to recommend things so that I don't, I might not necessarily know what I'm looking for, but I have a general idea, but I don't know exactly what I'm searching for. And then are these things aligned with certain standards in terms of metadata and management? Are they aligned with certain types of topics and things? And trying to accommodate all of those things. So as we said, there's the recommendations and reporting feature that we have. Coming along will be a syndication feature that essentially allows one installation of the Open LXP/ECC technology to communicate and broadcast its records to another installation, which allows you to attain all sorts of interesting architectural and content syndication. The idea of supplemental metadata that we talked about, which is a very powerful feature of being able to provide additional information that wasn't available from the source repository and augment records using that information. In addition, any information that is indexed but from the source repositories that doesn't fit with the current standard, we don't just throw that away. We actually save it. We call it the bag of spare parts that you end up with at the end of building the furniture. So we don't throw the spare parts away. We keep them, we pass them along, we index them, and we make them searchable. It's still useful information, so we lose nothing at the end of the day with this technology. And I think that's a really powerful aspect of it. The extensibility side of things, I think, is one of the best features of this. It's open source software. It's easy to add new indexing agents. It's easy to deploy technology, as we'll see. You don't have to deploy an entire footprint. If you want to plug into another installation just with an agent, you can just deploy an agent. There's all different ways of doing this. You can build new user experiences on top of the pipeline, with your own technology stack. There's all different ways to extend this technology. And really, as more collaboration happens with this platform, as more agents are built, as more metadata is indexed for a given installation, the value of this overall solution just continues to increase. And what's really interesting is as new agents are added to the technology, all of the installations, all of the operators, all of the organizations taking part benefit from that. So let's say, we said that edX is a third-party agent that's been built so that you can access edX learning experiences. Let's say Coursera, someone builds an indexing agent for Coursera, and that gets plugged in, or for Skillsoft, and that gets added to the solution as well. all operators of this technology now have access to that. So for one development effort, everyone benefits. Being open source, it's free. There you go. You have it. You'll have to pay for your access to the content, obviously. That's a negotiation between you and the provider. But the technology, the connector, the agent, that's something that just becomes available. So there's this exponential value that gets created as more and more investment is made in the technology. All right, so the solution architecture, the technology stack. The guiding principle for solution architecture, it was open source, or more specifically, license free. Let's say it that way. You know, no licensing fees involved in order to develop the technology, and that's the premise that we stuck to the entire time. We leveraged an open source, free to the world concept for all building blocks for the solution across all components. The agents are, as we described, essentially automated web crawlers. Each agent has a different implementation because the method for accessing the source metadata is different for each organization. And so they all have different implementations, but they generally follow the same sort of concept where we're hitting a web API, or we may be pulling information from a set of screens or something along those lines, maybe a base file, a flat file drop. There's all different ways of collecting the information. The agents are contributing that information, that metadata, to a centralized index service that they are configured to connect to. The agents perform a transformation to the standard, and then they pass that information off to the index service. And then we have the discovery service that sits on top of all that and essentially pulls information from the index service in order to display records to the learner. We have all of these interesting DevSecOps practices that have been incorporated in as we've learned more over the course of the project. One of the architectural principles that we adopted very early on was a microservices architecture, a containerized architecture. And so over here on the side of the logos, you see things like Docker and cloud services such as Amazon and Azure and Terraform, and this all has to do with containerized deployment, which is we've come to believe is the not only the way of the future, but it's really the way of now. This is how new solutions are being built now, and we've been able to reap the benefits and the value of standing on top of those things. So. And then just we've got our sort of call out at the bottom here, where we are working currently with DoD cybersecurity stakeholders, such as C5, ISR, in order to prepare the solution for accreditation for both IL4 and FedRAMP moderate. So, all of this is kind of fitting in. We're using defined technologies, very little inventing technology stack components ourselves. Obviously, the application code that is embodied by the OpenLXP technology is something that the team has built. But even right up into the web frameworks, React and Django, for example, those are all things that are community built, open source, and free to the world. So. All right, so I think we're moving into demonstration time. So what we'll be showing you through the course of the demos here, essentially we're going to go through a learner discovery experience. We're going to demonstrate a metadata management experience. And then we're going to just quickly sort of cover from the code side of things, the open source side of things. We're going to just jump over and we'll show you the code repositories. We won't get too far into the weeds with code, so hopefully we don't scare people away on that. But we did think it would be beneficial to just show everyone where this code lives and that it is publicly accessible. So. I haven't seen any questions come into the chat yet. If anyone has a question they'd like to ask about the first part of the presentation, please feel free to throw it into the chat, and we can fill some of the space while we're waiting here with answering any questions. Eric, is there anything that we went over during the first part of the presentation here that you feel like we should just elaborate on a little bit more?
I think, the only thing I would say is that as we go over the OpenLXP repository, the code repository, what we've talked about really, especially through the lens of the IPT stakeholders, is building indexing agents. So we'll call special attention to the indexing agent component, because that's like basically the lightest lift to be able to contribute. And as Matt mentioned, you don't have to deploy the full solution. You can just work as a contributor and make your content discoverable and be part of that. And hopefully what you'll see if you review it with your IT stakeholders and maybe ADL and the project team here with ECC is that's a pretty light effort, right? What used to take maybe months and years in terms of getting agreement on a metadata standard and how it was going to be reflected in the database, and what about migrations? I mean, all of that, being able to demonstrate in this project, being able to do that in a matter of days, maybe tops a week. So that won't come through in a demo, but we'll have a chance to talk through that and look forward to speaking to it in just a few moments.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Eric. All right, so we have the screen being shared now at this point, and as I mentioned earlier, we're going to demonstrate two different experiences along the lines of the personas that we talked about earlier and the workflows. The first experience we're going to demonstrate here is a learner discovery experience. So here we are. This is the experience discovery service. It is a standalone component. It's deployed separately from the overall metadata pipeline. However, it does interact with the search engine technology that indexes the records. We've used an open source technology called Elasticsearch for that. And it also interacts with the central hub index service that contains the sort of the composite metadata record that's been transformed into the learning experience metadata standard format. So here we are. Swathi's she's going to click the sign in button. As you can see, we currently support a very basic form of user authentication, which allows people to basically generate a profile internally in the system. Really just some simple information here. You can enter an email address and a password in order to create your profile. This establishes an identity for you in the system and allows you to do things like creating interest groups, for example. And as new functionality is added and profile type behaviors are needed, we have this. Down the road, you'll see user authentication mechanisms such as SAML 2.0 support, and the team's actively working on that right now. So. All right, so here we are. Why don't we go through just some general review of this particular page. If you scroll down a little bit, you can see we have Spotlight courses, which are not currently appearing. But generally speaking, we would have Spotlight courses that appear here. So we'd actually have an operator or an administrator be able to call out a particular set of courses in order to be able to make those available to everybody who logs in. We can do a search here from a keyword perspective. Say we're searching for cybersecurity, for example. We're interested in some sort of cybersecurity course. We could enter a cybersecurity keyword into the search bar, and then we'll see a set of results come back. And so here you can see we actually have three results in this particular installation of the Open LXP technology. So this is running off of Swathi's local workstation. So she's got a certain base set. Typically, you would see a very robust or a more robust set of information here. You'd see all of the matches across all of the different source repositories that are indexed. But here we have some for JKO, and you can see we have a couple of different ways to sort this technology or sort these results. There's a relevancy search, which actually functions off of the Elasticsearch relevancy ranking algorithm. And then we can also sort by, I believe it's course title and some other things. We can drill into a particular course here, and we can get more information about the metadata for this course. So you can see here we actually have the metadata that's been indexed from the JKO data set. And so here we have the full title, we have the course description, we have thumbnail image link outs, and we can even click view course here to open the course up at the JKO source itself, assuming we have access to that course. There's some additional metadata that gets defined here that can be displayed. So really anything that gets mined from these records can be displayed on the course or on the course detail screen. In addition, the administrators have complete control over which metadata fields are displayed. And that's as easy as going into the administrative console for the discovery service and selecting which metadata fields you feel are important. You can even map in new metadata fields and things along those lines. So this idea of flexibility and control for different installations is something that we've built into as many aspects of the solution as possible. In addition, down below, we run a relevancy or a yeah, I guess it's a relevancy search, where we actually reach back to the search engine and we say, here's some additional keywords. Can you please provide us with some related matches for this particular metadata information? And so we actually have some different courses that come back as sort of follow-on discovery threads that someone could potentially explore. So then the last thing that we'd like to demonstrate here is the interest list capability. So we can actually say add to list, which you can see here, and we actually have a small pop-up window that comes up, and we can take this particular course and we can actually add it to an interest list. We can create a new interest list. We can append it to an existing interest list. And this allows us to sort of keep track of these in a particular bundle. So we can build our own custom curricula, our own pathways and things along those lines. And ultimately, these will be discoverable by someone else and they can actually be followed. So when new courses are added to these lists, or if this interest list is, say, a more broad match criteria type of interest list, notifications can ultimately go out to subscribers that let them know when additional matches are available for these lists. And that's sort of the discovery experience that we have right now in the prototype. There are some additional features. We definitely recommend that you get involved in the testing aspect of this so that you can become more familiar with some of the different types of functions and features that are available in the discovery service. And there's certainly a backlog of additional features and ideas that have been coming along as more and more of this has become available for people to interact with. So that will continue to happen over the next period of performance as we interact with these tools and new ideas and behaviors are discovered. So now we could jump over to the management experience, and we can show what it's like for an experienced manager to actually go in and access a particular metadata record and show some of the different aspects of how to modify records and augment them. So Paul, I see your question in the chat about PII and is PII included. So there are no specific fields in the learning experience metadata schema that are, I believe, considered PII type fields. There could possibly be sensitive information that gets indexed from these source repositories, say an instructor's email address that happens to be in the course description or something along those lines. Those are things that the solution itself does not necessarily have control over. So if the metadata has sensitive information in it and it gets indexed by this solution, yes, in theory, there could be PII that's involved in there. And that kind of gets back to the security of the system, what types of domains is it deployed in, who can access the information. But that's something that we're certainly working through with the project team and you. All right, so here we are in the management interface. This is, again, a separate standalone application that sits on top of the indexing pipeline, specifically the indexing service. So we just showed you the discovery service, and that sits on top of the pipeline as well. So as you can see, different experiences can be constructed and built to interact with the overall data set. So, it's not like you can only have these two and that's it. In theory, you could build a new interface if you wanted to on top of the APIs that exist for the index service and the search engine. So this is the management interface that the team has built as part of the prototyping exercise to demonstrate that it is possible to build a management interface for metadata on top of this. So for here, we can sign in, and we would, in theory, be an approved manager, and we'd be able to sign in to be able to access this console. For this particular installation, this particular user has access to the JKO catalog, but if there were other catalogs that I had access to, they would appear here as well. So I can drill into the JKO catalog. And then the course list loads here. And we can actually narrow down the course list if we were looking for a particular course here. And you can see that the course list is dynamically filtering itself down, so you don't have to really wait for results to pop up, but it's possible for us to narrow things down pretty quickly here. So it's sort of a real-time filtering capability, which is something fairly standard now with web interfaces. But we wanted to make sure that we implemented it here. And a lot of this sort of comes along, not necessarily for free, but you get some of these capabilities along with web frameworks, such as the React framework that we chose to use for this particular solution. So we can pick a course here that we're interested in managing. So we can drill in here, and we get to a detail screen where we can see all of the metadata that's been indexed. Now, this is the metadata that has been already mapped to the defined standard. So the learning experience metadata standard in this case is the draft P2881 specification. And we know that that's changing and evolving, which is why a lot of what's been built here has taken that into account. But you can see that these records from JKO, when compared to the overall metadata field set for P2881, which has hundreds of fields, there were only a small fraction of those fields that were actually populated from the base metadata from JKO. Now, as I said, agents can become more robust over time. They can access additional ancillary services in order to populate more and more of the metadata from a pipeline perspective. But if there was a particular field that I wanted to be able to modify or augment here, I could actually go into this edit interface. And the edit interface actually allows me to do a couple of different things. It allows me to override information if I would like to change a particular piece of base indexed metadata. And I can also add additional fields here, whether or not they map to the defined schema. So I can add new fields and values that map to P2881, for example, that maybe didn't come through the indexing pipeline. I can also add completely new fields that would allow me to append just additional information overall. And this idea of adding additional fields that are outside of the schema is something very powerful. As I said, there might be a field that is not defined in the schema that we know that our personnel are searching for in order to find particular types of experiences. And that's something that can actually be controlled at scale in the agent as well. The agent has the capability for inserting fields into every record. And in this case, we're showing you about working on one individual record. But if you had a field that you wanted to apply to all records that are indexed, for example, maybe a web address or something along those lines, you can actually do that at the agent level. So it's very powerful. All right, so what else should we show here? So we've got metadata management. We updated the metadata. We can click the done. And now we've got an additional field that's available here. And again, whether it's with P2881 or not, this additional field will be passed along to the search engine, which will make it available for discovery in the discovery service.
Matt, John Rivera from ATC. Quick question. So when I make a change in the management console that you have here, and now it doesn't line up with JKO, and the index agent goes out there and gets the data, and then again, that data is then populated into the ECC database, and now you have a mismatched data field. So what takes the priority here? Is it going to be what's an ECC changed, or is it going to be overwritten by what came from the index agent?
Right, it's a good question. We talked about that a lot. Who wins when we have a field that we add here, but then on the next indexing run, well, geez, that field is now present in the source. And so which one wins? The new field that's now present in the source that's giving us a base value, or this override value that we have here in the index service? I believe, and we can confirm this, but I believe what we decided, Mac, maybe you can help us too. I believe what we decided is that the base value wins and that the supplemental value loses, essentially, in that merge conflict. We may have it the other way around at the moment, where the administrator would need to go in and remove that field in order to allow the base field to win. Generally speaking, I think the supplemental data fields are designed to overlap and override the fields that are already in the information. So I think actually what would happen is the supplemental metadata field would win because it's treated as an override at the end of the day. So an administrator would simply come in here, remove that field from this record, and then the base metadata field would be able to flow through at that point.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. I was going to say there's some other things to think about. I mean, we don't have to get to them in depth right now, but certainly what we've built here is the construct to be able to even broker that type of system check. really what we'll need to think about organizationally is if how often you're automating. Obviously the initial indexing is going to be really important, but then you may choose to really just go about updating your information and send learners to this portal or your installation of ECC rather than fiddling with metadata at the source level. And so certainly there, as has been a theme here, a couple different ways that we might go about that, but we do recognize that part of this process is really striking at, once we have the technology, how do we truly federate? And then how do we allow organizations to be able to make the updates where they need to, and try to have that consistency of data, John, that is obviously so vital.
Great, thank you.
All right, so I think that covers the experience metadata management use case, just at a high level. Obviously, there's a lot more here. And as I said, with the discovery service, please get involved with the ADL team with respect to acceptance testing and just becoming more familiar with the prototype and the current capabilities. Hopefully that will generate some ideas around enhancements to make and additional workflows to consider. So there's a lot more where this comes from. All right, so the third case we want to just show real quick is just to jump over to GitHub and show the code repositories. Some of the people on the call are probably wondering how to get involved in this, and I think that one of the things that we want to just demonstrate very quickly is that, again, all of this code is open source. It's free to the world. And you can come in here and you can contribute to existing code repositories. So if there's a particular enhancement to a particular component that you feel is needed, and you have the capacity and the resources to tackle that enhancement or that fix, for example, you can go ahead and you can do that here using our GitHub workflows. If you want to build a new connector on your own, we can create a new code repository here. Say, I gave a demonstration of Skillsoft earlier. We could have an OpenLXP XIA Skillsoft connector, and we can simply use the existing implementations as a reference guide and follow along with those templates and build a new connector to connect to a Skillsoft system, for example. And then that would be able to be indexed along with all the other metadata for particular installation. So there's a lot here. We don't have to dive into the nitty-gritty of the code, but again, just showing you it's open source, it's here, it's available. I think that there are some different capabilities here, including some packages to make things easier in terms of reusable functionality, such as a notifications package. In addition, we haven't really touched too much on the schema service at this point. As part of the prototyping exercise, we delivered a reference implementation for a schema service. And that schema service is available here too as a separate deployable component. And that's actually a key part of the pipeline as far as transforming records and validating records that are indexed. But that schema service is something that's been deployed here as well. And then finally, all of the ideas that we've had around one-click deployment, infrastructure management. There is a code repository here called OpenLXP Infrastructure. And you heard us mention Terraform earlier, and the infrastructure code project is not actually a separately deployed component, but it's a collection of deployment scripts for both AWS, using Terraform for both AWS and Azure. And we're actually going to demonstrate the use of those scripts in just a minute here. But essentially, using Terraform, we have a set of scripts that know how to deploy each of the components and the containers involved in each of those components to both the AWS cloud and the Azure cloud. So both of those are here, and we're very excited about that.
Let's go ahead and I can demo them right now. We have a short video here to try and help visualize that.
Awesome, let's do it.
So this, now admittedly, this was one of our cool features from, I think, our first project increment quarterly review that we did in like January or March, but we've been able to spruce it up significantly. So give me just a moment here. Here we go. Let me press play. There's no sound. But what we're showcasing here is we have Mike Son, who actually recently presented for the DevSecOps COP meeting last week with ADL. A great opportunity to showcase the project outcomes that we've had so far. Mike's been able to essentially here demonstrate that we've got our Terraform packages, we've got all of our solution components. Now this is in the AWS Workbench. And we are in the process of really just launching with a few clicks and a few prompts all of the software packages that are associated with the installation and the configuration. And I got this little green box here, right here in the corner to showcase. Mike was, I don't think, inadvertently put a timestamp on here. As you go through this, you'll see that we've essentially deployed all of our solution components here in Amazon Web Services within a matter of minutes. And the greatest part is that we can one-up ourselves here and showcase that we can do the exact same thing in the Azure Workbench from an infrastructure standpoint as well. So using that same Terraform construct, just applying it to Azure and all of the Azure services and platform features, we're able to, again, essentially deploy everything within a matter of minutes. So I put the timestamp on here to showcase that within a matter of 10 minutes, we've deployed the full configuration of ECC, both in AWS and Azure. And we're super proud of that. And I think that's going to carry us forward to what we're talking about in next steps.
Yeah, this is something that at the beginning of the project, we knew one of the requirements was to be able to deploy to a cloud, and that we would sort of need to be cloud agnostic, because that was when the JEDI contract negotiations were still going on. And so, the sandbox is AWS, but get ready because we're probably going to have to deploy to Azure as well. So, one, we knew we would have to deploy the technology to the cloud, to multi-cloud, but then also as we started to get into the ideas around container development and containerized deployment, we started to realize just how flexible and powerful it would be if we were to leverage a tool like Terraform and be able to have these scripts deployed to multiple clouds and have the same containers essentially deployed to multiple places, and just to be able to deploy, I don't know what. If you deploy the full solution, 80 containers across 9 or so, maybe 10 or a dozen components, and it takes minutes, and then you can tear it down just as quickly if you need to. It's a pretty amazing thing at the end of the day.
Well, that actually takes us to our next steps and thinking about where we go from here. The best news is that the course catalog is live in the TLA Sandbox. And as we just went over, we got the OpenLXP GitHub repository that everyone is able to go check out. The TLA Sandbox installation went live, I think, about a month ago. In the meantime, ADL has really put a lot of great structure around tests and evaluation for this ECC operational prototype deployment. We would ask that if you do have a chance to go visit the sandbox deployment of the ECC, that after you're done, you take a moment to leave some feedback. Speak to any bugs or defects that you may have run into. This is like, now we're at the point where we've reached something very real where we can have a user generated backlog, certainly around items that we need to fix and that we would need to address in an ongoing release management, but also how would you evaluate the experience? What did you like? What would you like to see? What have you seen elsewhere from front-end experiences that can help match the different use cases that we've described across this presentation, and ultimately help us get to the value proposition that we think ADL has done a fantastic job trying to isolate and solve for. And we're really excited that we're live and you all are able to go in and poke around. Just as a reminder, we've got 4 catalogs in there. So to highlight, we've been working as part of an integrated product team with 3 DoD stakeholders, 3 brave DoD stakeholders, one of which has already spoken up. That's the Air Education and Training Command. You heard Defense Acquisition University, and then Joint Knowledge Online. We've been tremendously grateful working with them. We have their catalogs, their initial catalog implementations up in the sandbox. And then we also have edX. edX is a content repository up as well. That puts us at a couple thousand records, give or take, what some of the published catalogs choose to make available. But the bottom line is we're really hoping that we've given you enough to go and check it out and dig around and let us know what you think. That's especially important from a DoD modernization effort and from an ADL project perspective. ADL has, as you've probably heard a few times in many of the briefings, they've established KPIs and measures for success related to the underlying use of ECC. And I just mentioned that the most obvious one is the total number of experiences and courses that we have within this enterprise installation of the course catalog technology. We'll see in just a few moments. We're really hoping to drive at adoption of indexing agents so that we can swell the catalog count, by an increasing amount here over the coming months and year. And the bottom line is we're able to do that now. That's really been one of the main things that we've been able to prove with the IPT and edX, and very excited by meeting that dimension of success. The other one, second one here, is related to course information and accessibility of course information. So we recognize that one of the major problems that we're trying to solve for is this discoverability, having to go reference lots of different information sources in order to find the right object. And so the hope here is with the enhanced metadata and with the enterprise search that we can actually measure the amount of time that we save, and of course the associated cost savings from a man-hour perspective, that just solving for the amount of time it takes for someone to find the training and development experience that they're supposed to or that they feel they need to. The final piece at the organizational level is thinking about, once we've started integrating catalogs and can start to observe some of the patterns and content and some of the metrics related to most engaging or most useful or best aligned to a competency or skill framework, really helping us to think about how we prevent future duplication of courses and think about how we can start to take a better enterprise look at the courses that are available and the experiences that are available to learners across organizational bounds. And a big thank you again to the ADL stakeholders for both framing this and then building out meaningful test scripts for our IPT members to go through here as part of our summer testing activities that we've just undergone. So where does that put us in terms of next step? Well, as I've referenced a few times already, we're well on the road towards an initial operating capability, and we're super excited about building out that IOC in the future. I think there's a strong operational prototype, obviously, that we reviewed today, that ADL can rely on to meet some of its goals across areas, right? I mean, the first one is related to the development work, right? The software engineering and really the product. As we talked about over the course of the presentation, we hit sort of like a baseline set of requirements to hopefully bring a really compelling and scalable like MVP to this group and to DoD, so that we have something that's compelling to start with. And we recognize that there's some things we're going to keep needing to build out. We've started on a lot of these. I mean, we've gotten authentication going, but we'll have in the future specific work around user authentication, really building out enhancements to the notification system, building out enhancements to the reporting system. A big milestone for ADL is having ECC integrate with XAPI, but also be a tool of XAPI adoption, right? Every time you add something or curate a list or contribute a list or recommend a list to another user, you are demonstrating a learning and development action, right? And you're building mastery, you're contributing to social learning, and ECC will ultimately be a tool for accelerating social learning and tracking that from an XAPI perspective. What is also really important from an ADL perspective is taking this data pillar related to experiences and linking it to the data pillars elsewhere that I mentioned briefly at the beginning of this call. And some of the work that ADL plans is to take that linked data construct and implement or shift towards more of a graph database model in order to further enhance how we make use of the data that we have in the indexing service that we've built out. The final piece for development is rely on everybody on this call. I mean, we're going to be working and building capability to integrate additional course catalogs in a faster fashion. And, part of the job beyond just the product build out is finding ways to integrate more course catalogs into this ECC implementation. Beyond the development, we know like a major next step is around formal documentation and making sure as we're going towards an IOC that we're hitting our marks on cybersecurity. We'll get to some of the software impacts and application impacts in just a moment, but we're currently working with C5ISR. Paul, thanks for making your presence known as usual. We're going to be working to support the review and then the documentation in preparation for an ATO. We'll also be working with the ADL's test and evaluation team in order to really structure our operational readiness tests and then our stakeholder usability tests specific to an IOC. As part of that, we'll be building out training artifacts for end user adoption and then system administrator adoption as well. And the final piece, as all of these things come together, is to put forth a roadmap for the leadership here assembled, and obviously ADL's core team, technical team, and functional team, so that we have a clear path and an understanding for how to get to full operating capability, so that we can bring all this great work to bear for the impact and the vision that we have as part of this larger modernization effort. Putting all those pieces together seemingly has always been the hang up, or at least has been a hurdle for us to overcome, is thinking about how we host the solution and then deploy it. Obviously, we want to do it in accredited and secure ways. Cyber is so important, especially as it relates to installation in the DoD environment. So we're going to be working to adapt the operational prototype to the DoD DevSecOps environment. Really excited in the conversations that we've had with the DoD CIO stakeholders related to their DevSecOps practices. And a lot of what we showcased today, we're hoping matches to some of the established methods and tools that DoD is scaling and ramping up across the enterprise. With that in mind, we'll be working to harden our software containers that we talked about today. We'll be integrating with existing accredited containers and then working to really establish a process to perform ongoing security measures, both in terms of development and testing, but then also in deployment and maintenance. And the final piece, which should excite everyone, really a key outcome of this IOC build is going to be having these secure accredited containers available in a FedRAMP moderate environment, which is, as we know, only going to dramatically accelerate adoption of this technology. So there's just so many converging points here. The great news story is, I think, across the prototype solution that we've built, we've already gotten started on each of these items. So this is not in any way going to be net new work, but a continuation of the hard work and effort from ADL, from the IPT stakeholders, from C5ISR, and obviously the development support team. This is my last slide, so we're almost at time. Is going to give us about 20 minutes. Everything I just described and a little bit more is represented here in this timeline. So as I mentioned, we wrapped up development earlier this summer. We pushed the prototype release candidate to the sandbox. We've been working on an ongoing basis with ADL and the IPT members to test what we've built. And then along the way, ADL has been carefully approaching the cybersecurity actions and activities related to getting to an ATO. We're hoping to line that to a release candidate, which comes about mid-year next calendar year. And that's going to lead directly into operational testing with the outcomes that we expect around next steps pretty much a year from now. So it's great. We're going to be resetting the clock here. An ADL has given itself and the stakeholders involved a clear timeline and a clear guidance on the next steps on this effort. Along the way, each catalog that we integrate only enhances the power and the impact of this solution. And so we're excited to have that as an activity that we'll be able to contribute to over the course of the upcoming 12 months as well. Before we turn to questions, I just wanted to take this moment to sincerely thank everybody who's been joining these biweekly calls over the last 11 and a half months. Special shout out to Brent Smith and Ashley Howe from ADL as the technical and project leadership team for this effort. Andy Johnson too from ADL, really deserves a lot of kudos for all the standards work and all the data modeling and integration that he's come to the table with. I really wanted to spend a moment to thanking our IPT members. You all have been so critical to this effort of what we've built, and I really hope that we can take a moment to appreciate the progress that we've been making as we've been hiking up the mountain. A little bit crazy to think that there's a new mountain that we're looking at, having reached the first one, but really a sincere thanks to stakeholders from DAU, AETC, Joint Knowledge Online, and then let's not also forget DCPAS, who have given us a different point of view to think about. But we're looking forward to working in the future with each of you as you look to adopt and further adopt these technologies. And your participation has just been so critical in the success that we've had and where we are today. So thank you. All right. We can do this any number of ways. We could have people post in the chat, or if you just want to speak up. John, thanks for always speaking up.
I don't know if that's a compliment.
No, it is. It's great. It's great. Any questions here about anything that we've seen, or?
I'd throw out one topic, I guess, more for discussion than anything. And that is with all the deliverables that you've identified that are currently located in the OpenLXP GitHub site right now, coupled with the fact that we are going to be pushing a lot of those through the Platform One DevSecOps pipeline. I guess I'm curious from the different stakeholders and other government organizations that are on the line, just to hear if there's any thoughts of that you all would want to kick the tires on this, start using some of this, stand up your own course catalog systems. Is there any thoughts about that going on inside your organizations? Anything we can do to help?
Come on, you're out there.
I said, please don't all speak at once.
Well, and some of it too is thinking about, from a broader perspective too, and this might even be for ADL. Obviously this has organizational impact, but how do we also think about building content repository connectors, where in theory we could just build that once and have it available for this implementation and for the rest of the DoD. So are there thoughts, to move past edX, and is that something that could also provide value here in the coming months and years?
I think one of the other things that might be interesting to talk about, even if not here, in the future, is how might all of this description data, all this metadata that we have for all of the different learning resources, learning experiences, how might it be used beyond like a catalog? How can AI and machine learning start to use this data to make recommendations to improve the learner experience, to improve the learner velocity, the transfer of learning, all of those instructional strategy, type things?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting area to explore. When you start to get your head around the idea that what you really have here is a broad, very robust and all-encompassing, potentially repository of learning experiences, learning opportunities across all of DoD. Let's say all of the connectors were in place and everybody's metadata was being pulled together into this one place. Now you can do some really cool stuff. For example, you can start to hook up with competency frameworks, which we've talked about in terms of alignment and things. You can start mapping those competencies to skills, and skills can be mapped to jobs and roles. And now you've got this pathway, sort of thing. And once you start bringing AI and recommendations into the picture, now you really start to address that readiness problem that is sort of underlying all of this at the end of the day, right? This is all about getting everyone into a better, more capable position than they're in today. And so the first thing that you can do from this sort of perspective is bring all the metadata together for all of those learning opportunities. Let's get everything into one spot. And now we can start mapping this out to opportunities for advancement and stringing those together, right? I think that's ultimately the really valuable piece that we're going to see come out of this.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not just about recommenders and things. It's also being able to look at the life cycle of a course to prioritize which learning resources do we need to update, which ones are being used, which ones are not being used, which ones provide value. And ultimately, as we get competencies more defined, I think we'll be able to do more longitudinal analysis to start to connect it to key performance indicators in the operational side of the department. Of course, that's way down the road, but that is one of the reasons why we're looking to move to a graph database so that we can really better support the scope and scale of how this will be used in the future. But that does bring up another discussion, is does it make sense to also support like a relational database for local learner profiles or for LXPs or for other things that may not need that full out infrastructure?
Yeah, I think that's what's nice about the architecture of the solution now, right? It's not that sort of choice, that decision point that you just sort of highlighted. What should it be, a graph database or a relational database? It actually can be both, right? There's no reason why the metadata that gets indexed into the central hub can't be passed off to a graph database for additional analysis and things. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what we're already doing. We've sort of proven that architectural concept by indexing all of the information into the index service itself, which is a relational database under the hood. But we're then taking that and we're forwarding that metadata to Elasticsearch, which is essentially a NoSQL database at the end of the day. It's got a search engine capability, that's its focus, but we're passing it off to that to drive discovery experiences. You can pass that metadata off to a graph database for linked data analysis experiences. So it's not an either or, right?
It builds upon itself though with kind of like a standard or a baseline deployment, right? I mean, even just to go back, talking about the recommendations piece, there's a lot of engagement level data that may not exist in a traditional course catalog or an LMS. And there's no reason, I think this is something that we'll probably explore in the future with DAU. There's no reason to not build an agent for that source as well, right? Like you can deploy agents for non-course content too, because you're just really capturing metadata. And then you could even have an agent deployment that manages other agent deployments. So for the first time in an enterprise, you're actually appending them together and then serving it up in meaningful ways. So this is really just about being able to figure out those organizational use cases across all levels, really, at the local installation, but then also at the global level from a DoD perspective, without fundamentally changing or breaking or redoing any of the core work that we've done here over the last 12 months.
Yeah, it reminds me of some of the conversations we had when we were doing some of the early requirements collections with the different stakeholders about what is a learning resource in an organization. And through that, I remember the DCPAS folks brought up, what about a brown bag or a webinar? Through other conversations, we talked about, well, what about a conference? What could we build a conference profile into the P2881s? Because many people would argue that a conference is also a learning experience that should be documented. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other experiences. I know, Alicia, we sat and saw some of your presentations in the past about kind of the flow of learning and what DAU sees as its curriculum space. Talking about learner support or performance support while they're doing their job and really kind of branching out. I mean, I think that's awesome because there are so many other types of content that are out there that are not necessarily knitted into a formal program of instruction. And so while we don't have that in the initial, MVP, I think that's certainly the direction that this can go as we try to think big picture of how we're going to provide value to warfighters down the road.
Speaking of big picture, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the Air Force members who participated in today's demo. I invited some of our stakeholders dealing with competencies, credentials, and badging and developmental special experiences in our database personnel. And the reason I invited them is I wanted them to look at slide 23 where it talks about other things that are going to go into this in the future. And there you go, where it says local course catalog integration. So we start integrating our competencies and we start integrating all the different information that we have in the data lake, which is why I have the data personnel here as well. So while you may not have been part of the initial testing, you will be part of the future of what this is going to look like, because you're not part of the EDCA package, but you are part of the learning catalog. And so we'll have to start integrating your information into this as well. This is why I invited you, and I thank you all for coming.
I would extend that to all the stakeholders that have given up so much of their valuable time. We know that everybody's very busy in their day-to-day jobs, and the fact that we have had such a groundswell of participation throughout the project, I think, shows the potential that we have to, in moving forward and doing something that really does provide value to a lot of folks. And that's my hope.
Got a couple minutes left. Any other questions? Other than that, I actually, ironically, might turn it over to you, Dr. Schatz, to do closing thoughts, parting words, and then we can plan to meet again in 2 weeks for our final sprint review.
Yeah, this has been great. And I want to echo what everybody else has said. I think it's absolutely critical that we have all of our stakeholders. So for all of you across DoD and otherwise who are helping to, give some rudder steer, test things out, give us feedback, that is absolutely essential. I was actually, part of the reason I was late is I was having a discussion with some senior folks in the Pentagon about the need to move past these local siloed examples of excellence, but that are so small and ephemeral that we just don't make any big change across DoD. It was not about this stuff. It was about something else, but the point is still the same. So often in a research and development space, we've focused on, okay, how do we demonstrate that in this one situation, in this one schoolhouse, in this one training program, we can get good data out, or we can have this great user interface or whatever. And, they happen once and then it goes on the shelf because we don't have the larger infrastructure, the at-scale implementation to really make it work. And the overall enterprise digital learning modernization, the learning ecosystem that all of this is going into, and then in particular, this one project within that larger strategic program, that is getting to that larger enterprise at scale implementation that we need in order to truly make an impact. The example I had used with the senior folks I was talking to about some of these other S&T projects is, I see this in DoD all the time within the science and technology space. We say something along the lines of, I'm hungry, and so I'm going to go to the supermarket. I'm going to go buy some more food, even though we have a pantry full of food. We go to the supermarket, we buy more food, we put it back in the pantry. Or in other words, we say things like, we really need a way to get our arms around improving our training and education. And we do these little one-off projects, and then we let them go sit on the shelf. And then we do it again, and we do it again. And what I see this project, again, the larger infrastructure that it's going into, is really an attempt to not just go to the store again, but to start to take those pieces out of our pantry and start to build out, you know, to build the meal, right? And
12-course meal.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I really appreciate not only that we're thinking about the big picture infrastructure, and you're all asking those questions too, right? Well, how do we negotiate between discrepancies, or how do we start to make sure that it gets implemented locally, right? These are all the things we need to think through, which I appreciate. That's what we're doing. I also appreciate that this is an approach that you don't have to throw out what's in your pantry today, right? You're going to take those legacy systems, you know, that old bag of rice that you have in there from whenever, and we're going to start to build on that. And so I'm feeling very confident that we are going to be able to start to implement this within the next year and really start to see that change. And, you know, as Brent was kind of indicating as well, once you start to get that infrastructure in place, right? Once we get our, I don't know, our sous chef line going, if you want to extend the analogy, then we can start to build on top of it so many other things, right? Then you can go to the store and buy truffles or caviar or whatever, and you have an infrastructure to start to implement it. And, you know, doing some of that baseline stuff to get the infrastructure in place may not be the shiniest object, but is absolutely essential to get us to where we want to go. And so I hope that you see that in what's going on here, because I'm very excited about it.
Wow.
All right, well, thanks. and again, team, you know, all the folks who've been working on this, I am just so grateful to be working with y'all. And I love that you're taking the modern approach to doing software development. I love that you're open to exploring, you know, oh, we got to switch to a graph database, or, oh, we found out these new requirements. Let's make sure that we're doing this the right way. And I do think we're on the right track. So really, really excited about where things are going.
Thanks so much, Dr. Schatz. Really, thanks again, everybody. I think this leaves us departing today, but the great news is I'm sure in a few months from now, we'll be doing another quarterly update. And so consequently, I'm looking forward to the ongoing dialogue and maintaining all the great momentum that we've built throughout this project. Thanks, everybody.